The hospital door closed behind me with a metallic clang. There were no words, no sympathy. Only the hollow sound of my wheels scraping the wet cement as the nurse pushed my chair without looking at me, without saying anything, as if I were an old piece of furniture no longer useful. I felt the icy water seep through my torn shoes, soaking through my socks, rising like needles to my ankles. On my lap, a plastic sack with my things, a toothbrush, 2 changes of clothes, a folded Bible, and an empty pillbox. It was all I had left. Everything that was me, packed in a piece of cheap plastic and tossed onto the sidewalk as if my life weren't worth a cent. My fingers were shaking. I didn't know if it was from the fever, the cold, or the rage. I was soaked. They'd taken me out of the hospital at 6 in the evening. They knew it was raining. They knew I was sick. They knew I had nowhere else to go. But that didn't matter. Because I didn't have insurance. Because I didn't have money. Because I was a poor old woman. And in this country, when you're poor and old, you become invisible. They let you die on the street with a cold smile and signed papers saying it's legal. I tried to speak, to say something. The words wouldn't come out. My throat burned. My chest ached with every breath, as if each breath were a stone. The world blurred. The rain pelted my face furiously, but no one stopped. People walked past me as if I didn't exist. Some lowered their gaze, others pretended to be busy on their phones. One man even crossed the street so he wouldn't have to see me. I wondered how many times I had walked that same street to go to the market, to bring candy to my neighbor's children, to hem the pastor's wife. How many times I had been helpful. How many times I had given without asking for anything in return. And now, at the moment I needed someone most, everyone turned their backs. I realized something terrible. In this society, your worth is measured by what you produce, not by what you've given. And when you can no longer give, you are discarded like trash. I remembered when I was still working, when my hands could still hold a needle, when I sewed wedding dresses at night, my eyes red from exhaustion, but my heart full because I knew every stitch meant food on the table. I thought of my son, of how I raised him alone, of the sacrifices. He promised he would never leave me, that when he grew up, he would take care of me the way I had taken care of him. But I hadn't heard from him in years. Atlanta was far away, very far away, and his silence weighed more than the rain. A car drove by, splashing dirty water onto my skirt. It didn't even slow down. I shuddered. A cough doubled over me. I felt like I was going to throw up, but there was nothing in my stomach, only air and sadness. I wondered if this was the end, dying alone, on a wet sidewalk, after a lifetime of struggle. The sound of an ambulance in the distance reminded me that the world went on, that other lives still mattered. A boy walking with his mother pointed at me from across the street. "Mom, that woman is sick," he said. His mother took his arm and quickened her pace. "Don't look," she whispered. "Don't look." As if my existence were something indecent, something that should be hidden from innocent eyes. I felt ashamed to exist, to breathe, to take up space. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The sky darkened even further. The rain didn't stop. Each drop was like a small insult from the universe. I tried to move the wheelchair wheels, but they were stuck. There was mud. I stayed still, resigned. At that moment, a shadow approached. I thought it would be another one who was going to ignore me. But no, it was a woman. Young, dirty, with tangled hair and an old jacket 2 sizes too big. She looked me in the eyes. Without saying anything, she took a blanket off her shoulders and placed it on my legs. It smelled of smoke, of the street, of neglect. But it was warm. She covered me as if I were her mother. She stroked my hand. Then she sat next to me in silence. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't judge me. She just stood there. Compassion came from someone who had nothing, who lived among cardboard boxes and slept under bridges. And I thought that maybe, in this world, those who have the least are the ones who give the most. I wanted to thank her, but my voice wouldn't come out. She understood me anyway. She squeezed my hand and said, "It'll pass. You're not alone." Those words, spoken by a stranger, hurt more than all the other things, because I realized how much I needed to hear them. because I realized how alone I truly was. The fever rose. I closed my eyes. I let myself be carried away by the sound of the rain and the sirens. I thought of my mother, of the days when she took me to the river to wash clothes, of the Sunday masses, of the cakes she baked with love, of everything I was, everything I gave, everything that was left behind, and what I had become: a number, an expense, a nuisance to a system that no longer saw me as human. But deep inside me, something still clung to life, a small, soft voice saying, wait a little longer. Because sometimes, when all seems lost, something changes. Sometimes when the world forgets about you, someone remembers. And though I didn't know it at the time, that night, in the rain, abandoned in a wheelchair with an unresponsive body and a tired soul, something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. My name is Margaret Louise Thompson. I was born on a cold Wednesday in February 1950 in a small town south of Mississippi. I was always told I came into the world amidst storms, and that my first cry was heard louder than the thunder. My mother, a seamstress like I later became, used to say that women of our blood weren't born, they were forged. And perhaps she was right, because I never knew rest, nor did I seek it. From a young age, I learned that in this world, if you don't work twice as hard, you won't survive half as long. I've lived alone for over 30 years. My little house is on a quiet corner in Jackson, Mississippi. It's not much, but I painted it with my own hands and filled it with my memories. A rocking chair my husband gave me before he died, an album of photos that are rarely seen anymore, and a kitchen where I spent much of my life making candy, cornbread, and apple pies that filled the air with cinnamon every Sunday. My kitchen smelled like home. My house was small, yes, but it was full of love, even when I was alone. For over 40 years, I worked as a seamstress. Not in a fancy boutique, no. In my own dining room, with an antique Singer sewing machine I inherited from my mother. I waited on women in the neighborhood, fitted party dresses, sewed hems, darned socks, and embroidered initials with gold thread on napkins for the ladies at church. They called me the lady with the magic hands, and I always responded with a smile, even if my fingers ached at the end of the day. I remember Mrs. Jenkins, a longtime client. She once brought me a completely destroyed wedding dress with coffee stains and a broken zipper. She had bought it secondhand and couldn't afford a new one. We worked together for days, me sewing, her cleaning, crying from nerves. On her wedding day, when I saw her walk into the church in that transformed dress, I knew my work had soul. It wasn't just needle and thread. It was dignity. It was hope. After my eyesight began to fail, I had to give up sewing. It hurt more than an illness. My hands, so accustomed to creating beauty with thread, now trembled. I felt useless, but I didn't give up. I started baking. Old recipes I learned from my grandmother, like honey pecan pie or butter cookies that melted in your mouth. I sold them at church, at neighborhood fairs, and at my neighbors' children's schools. With the little money I earned, I bought my blood pressure medication and saved some for the gas and electricity bills. I never liked asking for help, not even when things got tough. I preferred to raffle off my cakes than knock on someone's door to ask for a loan. Pride can be a prison, I know, but it was all I had left. I had given my life to others, to my husband, who died young of a heart attack, to my son, whom I raised alone, to the women in the neighborhood, whom I dressed for weddings, funerals, and baptisms. I never asked for anything in return. I just wanted peace, a little company, someone to ask how I slept last night. I'm 73 years old. My bones ache when the weather changes. Sometimes I forget things, like where I put my keys or if I've taken my midday pill. But I still like to sit by the window and watch the children go by with their backpacks. They remind me that life goes on, that everything I sowed still flourishes in others, even though I can no longer chase anyone. Many people believe that growing old means resting. That's a lie. Growing old means enduring. It's watching the world move faster while you walk slower. It's realizing that places where you were once welcome are now closing their doors to you. It's looking at your phone and seeing no one calling, that birthdays are forgotten, that Sundays are getting quieter. I never imagined it would end like this. I thought old age would be peaceful, surrounded by grandchildren, stories told in the living room, bread baked for visitors who arrive unannounced. I thought my son would be close by, that he would come on Fridays with flowers, that he would read me letters, or that he would simply sit and listen to me talk about times past. But it wasn't like that. I haven't seen him for years. His absence weighs more than any illness. Once a month, someone from the community center calls me to see if I need anything. I always say no. What could I say? That I feel alone, that I can't walk up the stairs without stopping, that there are days when I wake up without knowing why. No, I don't want to worry anyone. I've learned to keep quiet, to pretend I'm okay, even when my heart breaks a little more every day. In my neighborhood, the elderly slowly disappear. First, they stop going to church. Then you don't see them on the porch anymore. Finally, one day, someone says they found them alone, on the ground, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. It scares me to think that this will be my fate. But I'm even more scared to know that, if it happens, perhaps no one will even notice for days. The body changes. It shrinks. Your teeth are no longer the same. Your hair falls out. Your legs weaken. But the hardest part is when the world stops seeing you. When you walk into a store and are ignored. When in the hospital they ask if you have insurance before asking if you can breathe. When you become a burden on a system that only rewards youth and productivity. I don't want luxuries. I never did. I just want respect. A warm bed. A voice that says, "Good morning." A hot meal that I don't have to divide into tiny portions to last the whole week. And if life allows, a hand to hold me when I can't take it anymore. There are days when I feel strong. When I get up and bake a cake even though my fingers are shaking. When I clean the house humming an old church song. But there are also days when I don't even feel like opening the curtains. When I feel forgotten by God and by everyone. And yet, I continue. Because that's what women like me do. Those who were born between storms. Those who learned to survive without complaining. Those who loved with all they had and lost just the same. Those who were mothers, wives, seamstresses, cooks, neighbors, nurses, all at once and without asking for applause. Those who still believe that somewhere in this world, someone remembers them. I continue because something inside me refuses to give up. Because my story isn't over. Because even though they've left me on the street like a nuisance, like a pointless expense, I know who I am. And I know my worth. Because even with a broken body, with faded memories, with a wounded heart, I am still Margaret Louise Thompson. And I don't intend to disappear quietly. It all started with a small pang in my chest. A mild discomfort, almost as if a butterfly had tangled itself under my sternum. I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was the weather, the winter cold that always makes my bones ache. But that pang returned the next day, a little sharper, more insistent, as if my body were trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. And so it was, day after day, the discomfort grew. It went from being an occasional discomfort to becoming a constant weight on my heart, literally. I remember one morning in particular. It was a Saturday, and I was baking a pecan pie for Mrs. Carter, who was turning 84. I love baking in the mornings. The aroma of sugar mixed with melting butter made me feel alive, useful, as if I could still contribute something to the world. But that morning, something was different. As I mixed the ingredients, I felt my vision blur. My hands, which had kneaded with precision so many times, began to shake uncontrollably. I held onto the edge of the table to keep from falling. It was the first time I felt real fear. I didn't tell anyone. Why? Who would come running to help me? My son was far away, and the neighbors were already having enough trouble without having to deal with an old woman who can't even hold a spoon. So I sat back, waited for it to pass, and once my hands stopped shaking, I finished the cake as if nothing had happened. But that was just the first sign. As the days passed, I began to notice other symptoms. Climbing the stairs became a battle, one I lost every day. My heart would race just from sweeping the living room. The nights were the worst. I would lie down and feel a weight on my chest, as if someone were sitting there trying to stop me from breathing. I had to sit up, sleeping, sitting up with pillows piled behind my back. My dreams became hazy and short, and I would often wake up gasping, as if I had just escaped a nightmare. I forced myself to believe it was just age, that with a few days of rest, it would go away. But something inside me knew better, that this time it was different, deeper, more serious. One day, while watering the plants in the garden, I felt my legs give way. It was as if someone had disconnected the wires holding me up. I fell to my knees in the wet earth and could barely drag myself back home. When I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it and burst into tears. Not from the pain, but from the certainty that something very bad was happening. For weeks, I pretended. I smiled when the neighbor walked by. I said I was fine when Mrs. Margaret asked if I needed anything from the grocery store. I fixed my hair, put on lipstick, and made tea as if everything was the same. But inside, my body was a battlefield. Every day was a struggle, and every night, a miracle. I didn't have health insurance. I never had it. When my husband died, the money he left behind was barely enough to bury him. Then came the crisis, inflation, and the bills. Health insurance became a luxury I couldn't afford, so every time I felt a new pang, I took a painkiller, prayed, and hoped for the best. It was like living by a thread that unraveled with every breath. My son used to say I should move to Atlanta with him, that I'd be better off there. But after that argument we had years ago, his voice disappeared from my life. And although I sometimes wanted to call him, write to him, look for him, something inside me stopped me. Pride, perhaps, or the fear of hearing in his voice that I no longer had a place in his life. So I suffered in silence, convinced that if I was just a little stronger, everything would pass. But it didn't happen. One afternoon, as I was taking a tray of cakes out of the oven, I felt a strange heat on my face. It wasn't steam. It was a surge of internal heat, followed by such a strong pressure in my chest that I thought I might faint. I dropped the tray. The cakes fell to the floor. I held onto the sink, gasping for air, searching for strength. I couldn't find any. The kitchen was spinning. The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. I knelt, my forehead sweating, gasping like a fish out of water. I don't remember how long I was like that. I only know that when I opened my eyes, the light was different. Someone had covered me with a blanket. I heard voices. It was Mrs. Dolores, my neighbor. She was yelling my name, pleading for help. She had seen the smoke coming from my window and came running. When she found me, she called 911 without waiting for my permission. While the ambulance arrived, she sat next to me and held my hand. She didn't say anything, but her eyes spoke volumes. That was the first time I was taken to the hospital. On the way, the paramedic asked me if I had any insurance. I said no. They looked at each other, jotted something down on a piece of paper. I felt like a package no one wanted to receive, as if my life had a price I couldn't pay. When I arrived at the hospital, they put me on a stretcher and left me in a hallway. I listened to the doctors talking, reviewing papers, asking who would be responsible. I just watched them, hoping, praying, not for a cure, not for a solution, just for a little humanity. At that moment, I knew it wasn't just my body that was sick. The system was sick too. The one that promised to take care of everyone but left you alone when you needed it most. The one that measured you by what you could pay, not by what you've given. The one that pushes you into the abyss while smiling through latex gloves. And yet, amidst that coldness, I still breathed. Because something told me that not all was lost. That perhaps somewhere a spark of hope remained. Even though each heartbeat cost me a battle. Even though each breath seemed like my last. Because women like me, born in storms, don't give up that easily. The hospital smelled of chlorine, metal, and desperation. They took me out of the ambulance without urgency, as if it didn't matter whether I was breathing or not. They placed me in a wheelchair without asking anything, and pushed me down a long gray hallway. Every light in the ceiling flickered as if it too was about to give up. The sounds blended together. People crying, nurses running, machines beeping. But in the midst of that chaos, I felt alone, completely alone. A young, tired-faced nurse approached. She looked me up and down. Her lips were pursed, her expression impatient. She asked my name, my age, my symptoms. When I told her I didn't have insurance, something in her face changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was indifference, as if my worth had been diminished by that statement. She jotted it down on a piece of paper and walked away without another word. They left me in a waiting room with other people, but no one looked at me. No one offered me a blanket. No one asked if I could breathe. My mouth was dry. I wanted water, but I didn't dare ask for it. My throat burned, and I felt like every second I spent there was a sentence. The clock read 3:42 in the afternoon. The hands moved slowly, as if mocking me. The pain in my chest had returned. Sharper, it squeezed me from the inside, as if an invisible hand were trying to squeeze my heart. Breathing was difficult, but even more difficult was feeling invisible. Next to me, a young mother with a crying child was seen in less than 15 minutes. She had a folder of papers, insurance, IDs, everything in order. When her name was called, she stood up confidently. I, on the other hand, sank deeper and deeper into that wheelchair that felt like a jail without bars. I looked down at my trembling hands. The wedding ring still hung loose on my skinny finger. I thought of my husband, of how he used to say that if I ever got sick, he would move heaven and earth for me. But he was gone, and no one else did. I made my way to the front desk as best I could. The pain made me walk as if I were carrying stones strapped to my chest. I asked the woman at the counter how much longer I should wait. She didn't even look up. She told me that without insurance or someone responsible for me, they could only provide me with minimal care. I asked what that meant. She told me they would evaluate whether I was dying at that moment. If it wasn't urgent, they couldn't do anything more. I wanted to tell her yes, I was dying, that each heartbeat was weaker than the last, but I couldn't get my voice out. I returned to my chair. I tried to call him, my son, my last resort, the last name in my heart. I dialed his number with trembling fingers. The call didn't go through. I tried again, and again. On the third, it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, short, with tears in my eyes. Son, I'm in the hospital. My chest hurts a lot. I don't have insurance. I don't know what's going to happen. If you can come, come. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. I turned off the phone. The battery was in the red. Like me, like my life. Everything in me was on edge. I thought about leaving another message, but I didn't want to beg. Not to him. Not after everything. I held him to my chest, as if the cold metal could give me some warmth. I closed my eyes. I felt small, like when I was a child and afraid of the dark. Like when my mother left me home alone to go to work and I counted the minutes until she returned. But this time, no one would come back for me. The hallway was still crowded. People were coming in, going out, shouting, coughing. But I was still there, like a shadow. I heard my name. For a moment, my heart raced. I thought someone would finally come to help me. But it was another Margaret, younger, wearing a designer jacket. She'd been called to the emergency room. I remained silent. I no longer even owned my own name. Night was beginning to fall. The hospital lights grew brighter, but no less cold. The receptionist changed shifts. A new woman sat down. She looked at me with disdain. She whispered something in a guard's ear. Minutes later, a male nurse approached me. Tall, strong, his face impassive. He told me that if I didn't have someone to vouch for me, I should free up the chair. That they couldn't keep taking up space with an unsolved case. I explained that I was expecting my child, that maybe he would arrive. He told me that didn't matter anymore. They picked me up without a care. They carried me down a different hallway, the one leading out. A nurse handed me a plastic bag with my belongings, my folded blouse, my toothbrush, an empty box of medications. They left me at the back door of the hospital next to the trash bins, there, where no one sees, where no one judges, where what's no longer useful is thrown away. It was raining. I was soaked in seconds. Water ran down my face, mixing with my tears. The wheelchair remained on the threshold, motionless, like me. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to fall asleep and never wake up. I closed my eyes, trying to forget where I was. But the cold, The smell of garbage and the sound of the rain wouldn't let me. I thought of all the times I'd cared for the sick. I'd brought hot meals to neighbors leaving the hospital. I'd cooked for other people's funerals. I'd held trembling hands and whispered words of comfort to those who had no one. I thought of all I'd given, and I wondered why, now that I needed something, everyone had disappeared. I clutched my bag tightly. I was hungry, cold, scared, but most of all, a sadness that weighed more than my body. I knew I couldn't hold out much longer. I knew if no one came, that place would be the end of me. Still, I didn't stop looking at the horizon, searching for a silhouette, a face, an outstretched hand, any sign that I still existed for someone. Because even when all seems lost, the soul clings to the last thread of hope, and I, though broken, still hoped. I don't know how long I was out there. The sky was completely overcast, and every drop of rain seemed to hit me with intent. It wasn't just the water, it was the weight of contempt, of abandonment. The sidewalk grew cold beneath my feet, and the concrete seemed to absorb my strength as if the earth itself wanted to carry me away. My legs felt numb, my lips cracked, and my heart was beating slowly, as if it were deciding whether to keep fighting or give up. There was no one around, no one passing by, no one looking at me. The hospital door behind me closed with a metallic whir, as if telling me that whatever was happening to me was no longer their problem, as if I had ceased to exist the moment they signed me out without treatment. I clutched the plastic bag with my belongings, seeking some warmth in the little that still belonged to me. My phone, my only hope, was already dead. The battery gave out, just like me. Suddenly, something moved a few feet away. A hunched, thin figure in dirty clothes with slow steps. A woman. Her face was half covered by an old wool hat, and her coat had more holes than fabric. She was walking with a bag in one hand and a rolled-up blanket in the other. When she saw me, she stopped. We looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. Then she approached, without saying a word, and extended her blanket toward me. It smelled of smoke, of dampness, of cold nights under bridges, but it was the warmest thing I'd felt in days. The woman crouched down beside me and covered my legs. She stroked my shoulder with a trembling hand and whispered soothingly, "You're not alone." That sentence, spoken by a complete stranger, broke me inside. Because it was exactly what I needed to hear. Because she said it with a tenderness I hadn't felt in years. Because she looked at me with eyes that were equal to my own. Not with pity, not with indifference. She saw me. And that was enough for tears to start welling up in my eyes, as if a dam that had been holding me back for years had burst open. I asked her name. She told me her name was Clara. She had been homeless for 7 years, after losing her son in an accident. No one helped her. No one reached out. She learned to survive alone, sleeping in parks, sharing food with other forgotten people, experiencing the harshest side of life. And yet, there she was, giving me the little she had. She offered me a loaf of bread wrapped in paper, somewhat hard but still edible. We broke it in half and ate it together in silence, in the rain, like two souls clinging to each other so as not to disappear. In the distance, the sound of a police car broke the silence. Clara looked at me fearfully. She explained that sometimes the police chased homeless people away, pulling them from doorways, pushing them into darker areas where no one would see them. She told me that if they came, I had to pretend I was waiting for someone. Not to say I was living on the streets, not to confess I had nowhere else to go. That was the rule for survival. Pretend. Pretend you still matter, that you still have a place in the world. I did as she said. I sat up straight, pressed my lips together, and tried to look as dignified as possible, even though inside I was falling apart. The patrol car's lights passed by. Clara breathed a sigh of relief. She stayed with me for a while, softly humming a song I didn't recognize. Her hands moved nervously, her gaze occasionally wandering to the sky. She told me that sometimes she talked to her son as if he were still alive, that it helped her not to lose her mind. I told her I had a son too, that I hadn't seen him in years. She asked me if he knew where I was. I told her no, that maybe he did, but he didn't care. Clara looked at me with something that seemed like deep compassion. She told me she had known many women like me, abandoned mothers, forgotten grandmothers, wives who gave everything and received nothing. She told me that there was more pain on the streets than the world imagined, and that often the pain didn't come from strangers, but from one's own, that the greatest betrayals were clothed in silence, indifference, in phones that never ring. She asked me if I wanted to go with her to a shelter, but I was too weak. I couldn't move. My chest ached with every breath. I thanked her, told her I'd stay a little longer, that maybe my son would come. She gently stroked my face, wished me luck, and walked slowly away, wrapped in her torn coat. She paused once more before turning the corner. She looked at me as if she knew this would be the last time we'd ever see each other. And it was. Time passed. I don't know how much. The hospital lights went out one by one. The streets emptied. Only the distant sounds of cars and the rain, now falling in a steady drizzle, remained. I closed my eyes. My lips murmured prayers I barely remembered. Our Father, they said. Hail Mary, help me, Lord. Not for me, for my son, for what we were, for what could still be. I didn't want to die there, not like this, not in that solitude. Suddenly, a car screeched to a halt in front of me. The headlights blinded me for a moment. I heard a door slam shut. Quick footsteps. Someone called my name. Margaret. Her voice was firm, filled with urgency. I tried to open my eyes, but they were heavy. I felt warm hands around me, a face approaching. It was him, Michael, my son. His face bathed in tears, his shirt soaked by the rain. He scooped me up in his arms as if I were still a child. He hugged me desperately. He said sorry over and over. Sorry, Mom. Sorry I wasn't here. Sorry I was late. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him. My eyes spoke volumes. All the pain, all the waiting, all the love that remained. He cried like he was the child I raised, the one who promised he'd always take care of me. He settled me into the car seat. He wrapped me in blankets. He gave me his coat. His hand never let go of mine for even a second. And then, amid the chaos, the cold, the abandonment, for the first time in a long time, I felt something I'd forgotten. Warmth, hope, family, even if it was just for a moment, even if it was at the very end. He was back. And with him, something inside me ignited again. When I woke up, the light was soft and warm. It wasn't the street, nor the hospital. It wasn't my house either. The white ceiling had a flower-shaped light fixture, and next to me was a chair with a folded blanket and a cup with the dregs of tea. The smell wasn't of disinfectant, but of lavender. My body felt light, as if I'd been drained of the pain that had lasted for a few hours. It was hard to move my head, but my eyes searched until they found him. There was Michael, asleep beside me, his head resting on the mattress, still wearing the same soaked shirt from the night before, as if he hadn't wanted to move for a second since he brought me in. I didn't understand how I'd gotten there. The last thing I remembered was his voice yelling at me in the rain, his arms wrapped around me tightly, the warmth of his body as he lifted me up as if I were his whole world. I closed my eyes again and took a deep breath. The scent of toast wafted from the kitchen, and with it, a strange feeling of security. I hadn't felt this way since Michael was little, and slept cuddled around my waist after a nightmare. Minutes later, a young woman, perhaps a nurse, entered the room with a warm smile. She called my name. She told me I was safe, that my son had brought me in during the early morning hours in critical condition, that he had insisted I be seen immediately, and that he would cover all expenses. I was examined, hydrated, stabilized. I was alive. Against all odds, against neglect, against abandonment. Michael woke up when he heard my voice. He rubbed his eyes, took my hand, and kissed it tenderly. "Mom," he said, "forgive me for everything, for the years, for the silence, for not being there." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said there wasn't a day when he didn't think of me, that he walked away because he felt he wasn't enough, that it hurt him to see me constantly sacrificing myself for him, that he thought his distance would give me relief. But he was wrong. He confessed to me that he tried many times to come back. that he wrote letters, messages, but never sent them for fear that I wouldn't want to know anything anymore. I squeezed his hand with what little strength I had. He didn't need any further explanation. In his face, I saw the boy I raised, the confused young man, the man who had finally found his way back. I told him I never stopped waiting for him, that every cake I baked, every prayer I recited, every tear I hid, was for him. And now, having him there, sitting beside me, was a gift greater than any treatment, more valuable than any cure. As we talked, he told me that for years he'd been building his own life in Atlanta, that he worked at a large law firm, that he'd managed to build his own legal practice, and that he finally had the resources to take care of me like I had throughout his childhood. He showed me photos on his cell phone of a beautiful, light-filled house with a large kitchen, a garden with red roses, and a room with a white rocking chair just like the one he had at home in Jackson. All of that, he said, was for me. He told me about a granddaughter, his daughter, a little girl with big eyes and a mischievous smile named Naomi. He said she talked about me even though she didn't know me, that she always asked about her grandmother, that she wanted to bake cookies like me, that she had inherited my restless hands and my love of desserts. He showed me a drawing of the three of us, him, Naomi, and me, in a kitchen, surrounded by hearts and cakes. I couldn't hold back the tears. I felt something inside me mending, as if the broken threads of my story were beginning to mend again, stitch by stitch. We spent hours talking. Michael never let go of me. He brought me hot food. He fed me gently. He fluffed my pillows. He spoke with the doctors, signed papers. He was the son I'd always dreamed of. Only now he was an adult, capable, present. He asked me that, when I got out of there, I should come with him, to leave behind the years of loneliness, cold, and rationed bread, that I deserved rest, love, and company. He promised me that in his house I would never be alone again, that every morning I would be greeted with hot coffee and his daughter's laughter, that every afternoon we could sit together on the porch and talk about life, that every night, before I went to sleep, he would tell me how much he loves me. I believed him, not because I needed to believe it, but because his gaze didn't lie, because his voice didn't tremble, because his gestures were real, because he was there, caring for me as if the world depended on it. I felt loved, useful, alive. After so many years of surviving, I finally felt like I could start living, to have good days, to laugh without fear, to eat without counting coins, to sleep without wondering if I'd wake up alone. That night, in that unfamiliar but warm bed, I asked God to give me a little more time, not for myself, for my granddaughter, to teach her how to bake cookies, to read her stories, to tell her who her grandmother was before the world forgot her, to look at my son and feel proud, not for what he accomplished, but for the man he's become, to walk among the roses in that garden I hadn't yet seen, to sit in that white rocking chair and watch the days go by with gratitude. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel pain. I felt peace. I felt that love, though late, had arrived, that not all stories end badly, that even in the midst of abandonment, there's still room for reunion, that a mother never stops hoping, and that a child, no matter how far away they may go, can always return. I closed my eyes and let myself be carried away by that moment. I wasn't thinking about the hospital that had expelled me, or the cold street, or the years of silence. I was only thinking about that moment, about the warmth of her hand, the promise of a new home, the soft murmur of a life that finally had meaning again. Because as long as the heart still beats, there is always hope, and mine, that night, was reborn with strength. I left the hospital 5 days later, my legs still shaky, but my soul full. Michael was waiting for me at the door with a new jacket, comfortable shoes, and a smile I couldn't remember seeing since he was 10. He took my arm gently, as if he were holding something fragile and sacred. We walked slowly, step by step, and although each step seemed like a mountain, I didn't feel tired. I felt relief. Every step I took was a step away from abandonment, from the cold, from the silence, and a step closer to home. The car was warm, clean, and smelled sweet of vanilla. In the back seat, there was a blanket, a pillow, and a box of my favorite cookies. Everything was thoughtful. Everything was thought out. Every detail showed my son's effort to show me that he wouldn't leave me alone this time. He fastened my seatbelt and caressed my face before starting the car. "Let's go home, Mom," he said in a trembling voice, as if that simple gesture were a sacred promise. And it was. The journey was long. We passed through towns, stations, open fields, and endless roads. The sun set slowly, painting the car windows orange, and I, silently, gazed at the landscape as if seeing it for the first time. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. Every glance, every faint smile spoke volumes. Michael played soft music, old songs we'd listened to when he was a child, and I, with my eyes closed, let myself be carried away by memories, by the happy moments, by the late-night hugs, by the shared snacks, by the promises life hadn't let us keep. We arrived in Atlanta at night. The city glittered with yellow and purple lights, and the buildings seemed to touch the sky. I'd never been anywhere like this. Everything was so big, so different from my small neighborhood in Jackson. But amidst that vastness, Michael's house was a refuge. White, 2 stories high, with a wooden porch and a blue door that looked hand-painted. There were flowers in the windows, and a warm lamp illuminated the entrance as if it knew I was coming. As I got out of the car, Naomi came running. She was small, with long braids, cinnamon-colored skin, and huge eyes. She hugged me tightly, without fear, as if she'd known me forever. "Grandma," she cried, "Mom told me you were sick but that you're better now." Her voice was music. She led me by the hand inside, where everything smelled of home, of warm soup, freshly baked bread, love. Michael's wife greeted me with a calm smile. She called me Mrs. Margaret and helped me sit down. She offered me peppermint tea, covered me with a soft blanket, and spoke to me respectfully, without pity, like a queen. She looked me in the eyes, listened to me. She didn't make me feel like a burden. She made me feel like family. I saw in her the love that sustained my son. I saw a strong, patient woman, and I knew Michael had chosen well, that he was no longer alone, that now he had someone to care for him like I had. My room was on the ground floor, with a window overlooking the garden. There was a wide bed, soft cushions, white curtains that moved in the breeze, and on the nightstand, a photo of the 3 of us, me, Michael, and Naomi, taken the day before at the hospital. I sat up in bed, stroked the sheets, and took a deep breath. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen, but not because of its luxury, but because it had been made for me, thought for me, because every flower, every color, every object said one thing: welcome. Naomi came in with a box full of toys. She sat next to me and began telling me stories, that she'd learned to add at school, that she liked dinosaurs, that her favorite color was purple, and that she wanted me to teach her how to make cakes like mine. I promised we would soon. She hugged me tightly and told me she loved me, without fear, without filters, with the purity of someone loving for the first time. And inside, I felt my heart beat again, that something was rebuilding. Days passed, and I began to improve. I walked a little more. I sat in the garden reading. I helped in the kitchen. I talked to the neighbors. Naomi brought me drawings, flowers, songs. Michael would come home from work and ask how I was, what I needed, if I wanted to go for a walk. And every time he looked at me, there was a new sparkle in his eyes, a sparkle that told me he was healing too, that this house, this new life, was not only my refuge, but his as well. One day, while we were baking oatmeal cookies, Naomi asked me if I'd been scared in the hospital. I paused for a second. I looked at her. I told her yes, that I'd been very scared, but that the important thing wasn't the fear, but what you do with it. That fear can paralyze you or it can push you to fight. That I chose to fight, because I knew that somewhere, someone was waiting for me, and because my story wasn't over yet. She hugged me, and in that moment I understood that I wasn't just telling my story. I was planting a seed in her, of strength, of love, of resilience, that every word I spoke to her was a lesson for her future, that my pain, my abandonment, my return, all of it would have meaning if it served to ensure that she would never allow the world to shut her out. That night, we had dinner together as a family. Laughter, conversations, soft music. I felt the past begin to hurt less, the voids fill, the scars stop burning. And for the first time, I wasn't just a woman who survived. I was a grandmother, a mother, a woman with a story, a woman loved, seen, respected. At the table, Michael looked at me and said thank you, not for raising him, but for not giving up, for waiting, for believing in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And that was the greatest reward of all, because there are wounds that only true love can heal, because there are absences that only reconciliation can fill. And in that small dining room, under a warm lamp surrounded by voices I loved, I knew I had come back to life, and that this time, I wouldn't fall again, because now I had roots, because now I had a home, because now, finally, I had peace. When I left the hospital, the feeling of abandonment still enveloped every pore of my body. However, in that instant, something inside me began to awaken again, as if deciding to reclaim what had been taken from me. My legs were fragile, my lungs filled with humid air, and my heart beat to the rhythm of every memory that pain had buried over time. Michael drove me home. He didn't say much, and he didn't need to. His expression was a mixture of guilt, relief, and quiet determination. As we crossed the streets lit by yellow lanterns, the traffic and city lights seemed like part of a dream that was slowly awakening. That night wasn't just taking me to a new home. He was taking me toward life, toward someone who saw me, remembered me, loved me. The house was large and white, with a blue door that gleamed in the porch light and a small but well-kept yard. I realized, in that moment, that it wasn't just a dwelling. It was a refuge born of my son's belated love. Inside, everything smelled of home, warm soup, varnished wood, and most of all, something I hadn't felt in years, human warmth. Naomi, her daughter, ran out and threw herself at me, hugging me wholeheartedly. "Grandma," she said, her words like music. Her crystalline voice filled a part of me that had remained dark for too long with light. I hugged her tightly, feeling new stories being woven in her arms, new memories that I had the opportunity to build with her. Michael's wife greeted me without solemnity or pity. She called me Mrs. Margaret, offered me a cup of tea, and wrapped me in soft blankets. I didn't see compassion in her eyes. I saw humanity. I felt cared for, seen and worthy, for the first time in a very long time. That night, I learned that love doesn't always arrive at the right moment, but when it does, it heals with the tenderness of everyday gestures I never imagined I'd experience again. My room was on the ground floor, with a wide bed, clean sheets, and a window overlooking the garden. Beside the bed, a photograph of us, me, Michael, and Naomi, taken just days earlier in the hospital. Seeing that image shook me. I hadn't just survived, I had returned. Nostalgia mingled with a powerful sense of belonging. That same afternoon, feeling stronger, I helped in the kitchen. We baked cookies together, the oatmeal ones I learned to make years ago. While we mixed the dough, Naomi told me about her classes, her friends, her dreams. She wanted to learn to bake with me. She wanted me to teach her every secret of those cookies that were a hit in my neighborhood. Her words gave me back a part of me I thought was lost. A guide, a teacher, a grandmother. As we were baking, I thought about the history of these cookies. I remember that the first versions of chocolate chip cookies were created in Massachusetts by Ruth Graves Wakefield, who popularized them on the radio, and later sold them for $1 with chocolate for life from Nestlé. La Russe cuisine. It was curious to think about how small culinary inventions could generate so much history. Just as a simple cookie can become iconic, my story was finding its own flavor, its own identity after being abandoned. Naomi hugged me and told me she wanted to learn. I smiled with a full heart. She didn't say many words, but her gaze said it all. She wanted to be part of my story. And I, who always thought I'd given everything, received something I'd never imagined. companionship, laughter, a future. That night we had dinner as a family. Every bite was more than food. It was a symbol of what had returned. A shared table, gentle words, quiet laughter. I saw a different tenderness in Michael, one that came from learning to repent, from understanding that roots cannot be severed no matter how much time stretches between distances. As the house fell silent, I sat in the white rocking chair I'd seen in that photograph. I closed my eyes and felt the painful past become less thick. The scars were still there, but now they were interwoven with new memories, with real love, with family. And although the road wasn't easy, that night I understood that the endings we deserve don't always come in the expected time. They come when the heart is ready to feel. And mine, after so long, was ready to love again, to dream, to live. The days began to make sense. I woke up to sunlight filtering through the white curtains, the sound of birds in the garden, and Naomi's laughter coming from the kitchen. The aroma of coffee and toast filled the house like a daily caress. It was no longer a solitary awakening, one of those that begins in silence and ends in tears. It was a shared, human, tender awakening. Having a routine again that wasn't marked by need or abandonment was, for me, a gift. Michael had set up a small chair on the porch for me, with a round table where he placed my cup of tea every morning. Sometimes he joined me before leaving for work. He would sit with me in silence, hold my hand, and tell me his plans for the day. Other times, he would simply stay there, listening to the birdsong with me, as if we wanted to make up for lost time not by talking, but by being present, together. I started keeping a journal. I had a notebook Naomi gave me with a blue butterfly cover. In it, every night, I wrote down everything I felt, from small things like the taste of a new soup to memories that surfaced without asking permission. I did it because I needed to empty my soul, because for many years my voice was silenced by routine, by pain, by invisibility, and now, for the first time, I felt my words deserved to stay somewhere. One day, Naomi asked me if I had ever been truly happy. It took me by surprise. She looked at me with those big eyes that seemed capable of seeing beyond the obvious. I was silent for a few seconds, and then I answered honestly. I told her yes, that I was happy when Michael was a child, when we made cakes together in the old kitchen, when I saw him sleep without nightmares, when I hugged him and felt like nothing could harm him. I told her that I was also happy when I learned to read, because books were my refuge. And now, I told her with a smile, I felt something close to happiness again, because being with her father, in this house where there is no fear, was like being reborn. That conversation stayed with me, because it was then that I understood that happiness isn't a constant. It's a fleeting state that appears amidst the rubble, that it hides in the details, in a shared cup of tea, in a spontaneous laugh, in an unexplained caress, that we don't have to look for it in the grand schemes. It's there, in the small, waiting for us. Michael began to include me in his decisions. He talked to me about his work, his plans with his wife, Naomi's education. He asked me for advice. He listened to me. He made me feel part of it. And that, for a woman who had been discarded like old furniture, was more than enough to give me back my dignity. I felt useful again, not because I cooked or cleaned or cared for someone. I felt useful because my experience mattered, because what I lived through, what I suffered, what I learned in silence for so many years now had value. One afternoon, while knitting a scarf for Naomi, I remembered my mother, her way of telling stories, of embroidering at night while singing us old songs. I realized how much stories repeat themselves if one doesn't heal them. My mother was a forgotten, silenced woman. She lived with a harsh, absent man. She died without having said many things. I didn't want that for myself, or for Naomi. That's why I started telling her our stories. Not the sweet versions, the real ones, the ones that hurt, the ones that teach. I told her how I learned to work at 11 years old, how I washed other people's clothes, how I walked long blocks to deliver errands. I told her about the time I fainted from hunger in a plaza, about how many women of my generation survived without support, without networks, without options. And I saw something powerful in her eyes. Not sadness, not pity. I saw respect, admiration, and that gave me the strength to keep telling, so that she, her generation, knows where she comes from, so that it doesn't happen again, so that there are no more invisible women. Michael suggested we organize a family album. Together, we went looking for old boxes in a small storage room I'd forgotten existed. There were the black and white photos, the letters I'd written and never sent, the school report cards, the recipe clippings, the tablecloths embroidered with initials that no longer exist. All of it came back to life in our hands. Naomi touched them as if they were jewels. And they were, because each object had a story, a mark. We began putting together the album every Sunday. We called it Grandma's Roots. Michael wrote the dates. Naomi decorated the pages with drawings. I narrated each scene. "Laugh, Mom," Michael would say when he saw a picture of me as a young woman. And I laughed, even though I sometimes cried inside. Because this exercise wasn't just about cherishing beautiful memories. It was about healing, so that each pasted page would also be a healed wound, a reinterpreted memory, a forgiveness made into an image. That album became a ritual. Each new page was a small triumph, and with it, I understood that one can once again be the protagonist of one's own story, even after it has been erased so many times. One night, late at night, I got up to drink water and saw the study light on. I went over and found Michael reading one of my notebooks, my diary. I wanted to protest, but his face stopped me. He was crying silently. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know all this. I didn't know you suffered so much." He hugged me tightly. He told me that every word I had written was a lesson, that I shouldn't keep silent anymore, that the world needed to hear me. And then, something changed in me, because I understood that my pain wasn't just mine, that if I shared it, if I spoke about it, it could be a consolation for others, that I could transform what was once my prison into a bridge for someone else, that perhaps the meaning of everything I experienced was this: to help, to inspire, to be a voice. From that day on, I wrote with more strength, more truth, with the certainty that each line could be an open door for another woman, because silence would never again be my refuge. Now, I had a voice. And above all, I had someone to give it to. They began inviting me to meetings at the neighborhood church. They were simple gatherings with long tables, home-cooked meals, laughter, and prayers that required nothing, just company. At first, I hesitated to go. After so many years of looking from the outside, of carrying the idea that I no longer had a place anywhere, I feared those doors would close too. But Naomi convinced me. "Grandma," she said, "the pastor wants to meet you. She says I told her about your cookies and she wants to try them." I laughed. It was so simple, so innocent, that I couldn't say no. I carried a tray of my cinnamon oatmeal cookies, and although my hands trembled a little as I handed them over, they greeted me with hugs, with gentle words, with respect. No one asked me why I'd been alone for so long. No one wanted to know why I arrived so late to that neighborhood. They spoke to me as if I'd always been there, as if every wrinkle on my face already said enough. And that was enough for me, to stay. Sundays became special days. I would wake up early, get my clothes ready with Naomi's help, and we would walk out the door holding hands. At church, I would sit in the third row, where I could see the altar but also the faces of those singing, praying, and crying. I wasn't looking for a religion. I was looking to belong. And I found something more. I found community. One day, during a gathering of older women, I was asked to share some of my story. I hesitated. My palms were sweating, but I looked at them. They were women like me, with wounds, with losses, with kept silences, and I spoke. I told them about my years alone, about the winters without heat, about the times I didn't eat so Michael could. I told them about the time I slept on a hospital bench because I had nowhere else to go, about how they kicked me out without a word, like I was just another number. And at that moment, eyes filled with tears, not just mine. Several others approached me later. One told me that her daughter had also moved away, another that her granddaughter didn't recognize her, another that she felt her old age was a kind of punishment. They hugged me, and I understood that I wasn't alone. That pain, when shared, doesn't make it less, but it does make it more bearable. That sharing what I'd experienced didn't just free me. It also opened the door for others to do the same. After that day, the pastor suggested I start a small circle of older women. We called it Voices That Won't Be Silent. We met every Wednesday afternoon, sharing tea, cookies, and above all, words. We told stories, sang childhood songs, read texts that spoke of resilience, tenderness, and dignity. And little by little, that group became my new family. Because they weren't just older women. They were warriors, each one with a different battle, all with the urgent need to be seen, heard, and validated. Michael began to notice the changes in me. He saw me going out more, smiling more, talking more. One day he said to me, "Mom, I don't know how you managed to survive alone for so long, but you did, and now you're blossoming." That word stayed with me. Blossoming. It wasn't just about staying alive. It was about opening up again, about taking on color, about smelling different. And yes, that's what I felt. As if every word I wrote, every story I told, every hug I received was a petal being reborn. Naomi began accompanying me to the meetings. She loved listening to the stories, asking questions, and drawing what she imagined. One day she brought me a notebook she titled Grandma's Memories. In it, she began writing down what she remembered from my stories, drawing scenes, and asking me questions to continue filling them in. She told me that when she grew up, she wanted to make a book out of it all, that she wanted the world to know who her grandmother was. I cried that night. I cried silently, because I understood that my story, the one that seemed unworthy, small, and worthless, was becoming a legacy, that what I considered ruins, she saw as foundations, that my words would not be lost, that they would resonate. In the neighborhood, they began inviting me to events, to read my writing aloud, to teach recipes, to help with sewing activities. I was no longer just Michael's mother. I was Margaret, with her own name, with an identity, with a history. A history that had been denied, ignored, and extinguished, but that now shone brightly, not out of heroism, but out of truth. One Sunday, while we were cooking at home, Naomi asked me if I believed in miracles. I told her I did, but they weren't like in the movies. They didn't come wrapped in lights and music. That sometimes miracles were simple. A timely cup of tea. A word you didn't expect. A hug when you thought no one would hug you anymore. I told her that to me, she was a miracle. That her existence gave meaning to my resistance. Michael, who was listening from the kitchen, came over and hugged me from behind. "Mom, you are the true miracle," he whispered, "because you didn't just keep going. You taught us all how to do it." And in that instant, in that warm kitchen, surrounded by those who loved me, I understood that the years hadn't taken anything essential from me, that everything important was still intact, that I had lost time, health, dreams, but never my ability to love, to care, to be. And that, I knew then, was what truly made me invincible. Because a woman who has survived oblivion, abandonment, and scorn, and still continues to love, cannot be destroyed. She can be hurt, she can be silenced, but destroyed, never. New people began to arrive at the Voices That Won't Be Silent group. Older women who, like me, had spent decades living among imposed silences, among evasive glances, among memories that seemed too heavy to be shared. They came with timid steps, but with eyes that demanded space. And there we were, ready to welcome them with hot tea and an available seat, as if wordlessly saying, "You don't need to pretend to be strong here." One of them, Doña Clara, was 93 years old and barely spoke. She sat next to us with her wooden cane and floral dress and listened. The first day, she only murmured thanks. The second, she left a letter on the table. No one forced her to read it, but the shepherdess picked it up and, with her permission, read it aloud. In that letter, Clara spoke of how her family had placed her in a nursing home without consulting her, how she had gone 3 years without anyone visiting her, How one day they took her out without explanation and left her with a distant relative who didn't want her, and how, ever since then, she had felt invisible. No one spoke for a while. All we heard were sighs, hands reaching for other hands, tears flowing shamelessly, because Clara's story wasn't unique. It was common, too common. And hearing it, out loud, reminded us of our own absences, our own emotional expulsions, because there are many ways to be thrown out of a place. It's not always a slammed door. Sometimes it's silence, indifference, a lack of attention. That letter changed something in us. We began writing our stories in notebooks, not with the intention of publishing them, but as an act of resistance, like a soft but firm cry that said, "Here I am. I existed. I fought. I suffered. I survived." Every Wednesday we read excerpts, some with trembling voices, others with laughter through tears, because even in the midst of pain, we found reasons to laugh. And that laughter was political. It was life. Naomi helped me type my texts. She taught me how to type carefully, asked me how to spell a certain word, told me my handwriting was beautiful, even though it was a little crooked with age. One day she asked me if everything I had experienced was real. I told her it was. That the pain I felt was real, but so was the joy of seeing her there, with her long braids and bright eyes, giving courage to my voice. Michael, for his part, began to get more involved in neighborhood activities. He helped other families, donated time at soup kitchens, and offered transportation to those who couldn't get around easily. He told me he needed to do something useful, something to give back to the world what he'd received. And I knew that deep down, it was his way of making amends, of healing, of transforming his guilt into action, and that filled me with pride. One day, the local newspaper published a story about our group. They talked about the invisible women who were now telling their stories. They talked about Margaret, the woman who had once been kicked out of a hospital and was now helping others heal. My name printed on paper, my story told without shame. It scared me at first, but it also gave me strength, because I no longer had anything to hide, because every word was mine, and no one else could tell it. I received letters from people who had read the article. A woman from Chicago told me that, thanks to me, she had been encouraged to visit her mother after years of being away. Another from California wrote to me that she had started recording her grandmother telling stories. A man from Texas confided that for the first time, he understood what his mother had gone through growing old alone. And I realized that my voice, so small, so ragged by time, was reaching far. We began organizing intergenerational gatherings, young and old in the same room. We shared recipes, songs, memories. Naomi taught other girls what I had told her. Sometimes we put on plays based on our stories, small performances where every wrinkle became a scene, every gray hair an act of resistance. One afternoon, Naomi took me to the neighborhood park where there was a children's art exhibit. She covered my eyes and led me by the hand to a mural. When I opened them, I saw my face painted on the wall. My face, large, serene, with flowers growing out of my hair and a phrase written beside it. It said, "Women like my grandmother should never be forgotten." I broke down. I sat on the nearest bench and cried. Not from sadness, from emotion, from justice. Because for the first time, after so many years of silence, my story wasn't just heard. It was honored, turned into art, a collective memory, something other girls would look at in passing and perhaps ask, "Who was she?" And someone would say, "She was a woman who fought not to disappear, to be seen, to tell what many kept quiet." And there I was, just an ordinary old woman, painted on a wall, turned into a symbol, not for being perfect, not for having done something great, but for having endured, for having survived, for having said enough, and above all, for having chosen to love even when the world turned its back on her. We walked home that night slowly. The air was warm, the sky starry. Naomi took my arm and told me she wanted us to write a book together, a book that would tell everything, from the hospital to the mural. I said yes, we would, and I knew that book wouldn't be just for us. It would be for all of us still waiting to be heard, to be seen. to be remembered. Because there's no age to start over, and no story is too small to be told. The night before the book launch, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the porch rocking chair, wrapped in a soft blanket, gazing at the sky the way I used to when I was a child. Each star reminded me of a name, a story, a tear I'd once shed unseen. I thought of the women who were no longer with us, of those who never had the chance to tell their story, of those who left silently, as if they'd never existed. I also thought of that Margaret from a few years ago, alone, her body ailing and her heart withered, sitting on a cold bench in front of a hospital that turned her away for lack of money. And then, without being able to help it, I saw myself reflected in the window, and I wasn't the same. Something in me had changed. The day of the presentation arrived. Naomi woke up excited. Michael prepared breakfast. The house smelled of toast and fresh flowers. People from the neighborhood were waiting for us at the community center, where they had hung photos of the mural, enlarged pages from the book, and a sign that read in large letters, "Stories that must not die." I sat in front of the microphone with Naomi at my side. I took a deep breath. I wasn't afraid of the audience. I wasn't afraid of judgment, because everything I had experienced, every blow, every silence, every abandonment, had brought me to that moment. I opened the book and read the first page aloud. It wasn't just my voice speaking. It was the voice of many, the voice of a generation that endured in the shadows. And now, finally, it was coming to light. As I read, I saw some people close their eyes, others cry, others nod silently. Each word was a bridge, each paragraph, a seed. When I finished, the applause was long, sincere, and heartwarming. Not because she was a great writer, but because she had said what many are afraid to say, because she had remembered what many try to forget. After the event, a young woman approached me with her daughter. She told me that her mother had died 2 years ago, and she'd never dared to ask her about her story. Now, reading mine, she felt she understood things she couldn't before. She hugged me tightly. And in that hug, I knew it had all been worth it. That every tear shed in solitude now found meaning in the arms of someone who listened. That night, back home, we had dinner as a family. Michael toasted me. To the new Margaret. To the woman who not only survived, but was reborn. Naomi handed me a new notebook, blank. "Grandma," she told me, "this is for you to start your next story. Because this one doesn't end here." And she was right. Life doesn't stop when we think we're finished. Life begins again every time someone decides to love again, to tell a new story, to breathe again. Today, when I close my eyes, I don't see pain. I see legacy. I see a chain of women holding hands. I see my mother, my neighbors, Clara, Naomi, all together, all strong, all saying in unison that love, dignity, and truth have no expiration date, that it's never too late to be seen again, to be heard again, to be again. Thank you for following me this far. If this story touched your heart, if it resonated with you, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone you've lost, I invite you to leave your comment. Tell me, what's the story you wish would never be forgotten? Write, my voice matters too. Because your story deserves to be told too. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is an act of resistance, a beacon for those who still live in the shadows. Each subscription is like a hug for those who are no longer with us, and a hope for those who still seek to be heard. See you in the next video, which is already appearing on your screen. I promise it will be just as exciting as this one. Until then, take care, don't forget your story, and never let yourself be silenced.